While looking at this composition, it may be easy to get lost in all the details. In the reference photo I used for the painting, the flowers are just so complex with all the intricate veins and overlapping petals that it's easy to miss one defining characteristic, one fundamental painting concept that is present here. But once you see it, it will instantly help you choose the right colors if you want to paint something like this, and it will put you on the right track every time when it comes to creating realistic and visually interesting artwork. I'm talking about the concept of color temperature, or the relative coolness and warmness of colors. And in this video, we will take a deep dive into the fundamentals of color temperature using this sweet pea flower as a practical example. And I will share all my tips and tricks for using this powerful tool to create dynamic compositions with lots of volume and depth. As always, I will take you through the process step by step, and if you're interested in a real-time, much slower, much longer, more detailed version of this tutorial, where you see every stroke, it's on my Patreon along with black and white outlines and step-by-step photos. Thank you to all my patrons who support this channel and bring me so much joy by painting along with me. And of course, to all of you for watching and leaving your feedback and comments, they really make my day. So let's go all the way back to step 1, where we have a light pencil outline and a million questions. Like, what colors do we use? Because the reference just looks like a big blob of pinks, but we can make sense of all of it, I promise, by using color temperature to guide us. And as I mentioned in the beginning, color temperature describes how warm or cool a color is depending on where it's situated on the color wheel. As a general rule of thumb, colors closer to the orange and yellow side of the spectrum are considered warm, while colors that are closer to blue are considered cool. That's easy enough, but of course there's some nuance, and we will get to that in a minute. So let's start by choosing just one shade of pink. It doesn't need to be precise. Let's say I'll go with magenta, and now we can build our palette from here by moving along the color spectrum towards cooler and towards warmer pinks. My goal is to cover everything with this very light first layer of color, then we can build on it by adding darker shades of pink later on. And as you can see on the color wheel, there are many different shades of pink, and some of them are closer to blue and violet on the spectrum. Those are considered cool pinks, which brings me to tip number 1. Cooler colors with lots of blue in them will always appear further away and or appear like they're in the shadow. So as we're painting this first layer on the petals, let's start adding a bit of blue into our magenta to indicate the petals and petal segments that are in the shadow. Like this flower, for example. It's completely turned away from our source of light, and so cooler shade of pink will work much better here. If you have a nice violet or purple, it would be even more subtle and beautiful because those colors are like a bridge between magenta and blue. The second tip I will share is kind of like the opposite effect, where colors that are closer to oranges and yellows are considered warm on the spectrum. They will always appear closer and draw more attention from the viewer. So when I'm painting those sweet peas in the center of my composition, I'm going to be leaning towards my warmer pinks, moving along the color wheel away from magenta and going heavier on quinacridone red, quinacridone coral, which are both a few steps closer to orange, and they will help me bring the center of the composition into focus. Now let's make sure the entire layer is dry, and we can now move on to a more detailed second layer using the same shades of pink. This time we're painting wet on dry, only covering those areas that already have some color, just accentuating the areas of light and shadow with some extra pink and violet. And I will continue to move along the color wheel, choosing cooler pinks and violets for supporting flowers, while using warmer pink accents on the petals that I want to draw attention to. Even on the central flower, like this one, I will add a subtle hint of violet and purple in some areas to accentuate the shadows between the petals. And maybe even exaggerate it a little bit compared to my photo reference. After all, it's my job as an artist to choose the right color temperature and to position these areas of warm and cool colors exactly how I want them. If this was just color matching using a reference photo, we would have no control and everything would be quite reactive, but we're artists and we can decide exactly what goes where and why. So notice how much blue I include in this flower on the left-hand side, essentially just pushing it away relative to the rest of the petals. It's like saying this is simply a supporting element. Your eyes can go back to looking at all the warmer pinks in the center. Similarly, these flowers pointing to the right, I've only included them in this area to complete the overall shape of my composition, and I'm being very generous with my blues and violets because they're really less important than the rest. These cooler hues are most appropriate for the shadow areas and also for those flowers that I've added to my composition as supporting elements. By moving towards blue side of the color spectrum, I'm signaling to the viewer that those petals are in the shadow, less important, and I want you to focus on the cluster of snow peas that is in the center supporting the dragonfly. In other words, using cooler and warmer shades of pink allows me to emphasize dynamics and positions between all these different objects, in this case, the relative significance of each flower. And now that our flowers are almost done, I'll add some veins and details in a minute. Now we can work on the leaves and apply the same concept of color temperature, but using greenery. So let's pick a warmer shade of green, closer to yellow on the spectrum, and another shade, but this time much cooler, closer to the blue. I love this combination of sap green and aqua green, and I often use just these two in my tutorials. It gives just enough flexibility and a range of temperatures to create a nice, simple, but quite realistic effect. You can take one green, if that's all you have on your palette, and add a little bit of yellow for warmer shades and a little bit of blue for cooler shades. I have an entire tutorial on mixing greens on my channel, and you can check it out after this video. I will leave a link in the description below. But right now, let's go over all the green details, and I will use my warmer green as base and add cooler aqua green to those parts of the leaves that are pointing away from the light. And as I'm adding these green details, I will explain to you what is probably the most difficult component of the color temperature concept, or at least it's the one that I find beginners struggle with the most. I'm talking about the concept of relative color temperature. What I mean by that is the same color can be considered warm or cool depending on the colors that surround it. So up until now, we were looking for subtle temperature shifts within a range of pinks, but as soon as we started adding greenery, which is way closer to blue on the spectrum than any pink can ever be, the entire cluster of sweet pea flowers, this whole cloud of pink in the center, is now looking warm as a whole. No matter what shade of pink or violet you pick from the petals, it will always be warmer next to the greenery around it. And so a painting of a pink flower surrounded by blue-green foliage and leaves and all the little branches creates a nice sense of contrast and balance, drawing the viewer's eye and creating a dynamic composition with lots of visual interest. On the other hand, when we zoom in, like I will now when I want to paint the veins, we can appreciate the subtle variation of temperatures just within one color. So pink can vary from warm to cool depending on a specific shade, and we can apply it intentionally to highlight some areas and downplay others. At the end of the day, color temperature is relative on the context, and playing around with different pigments using these principles can really enhance your work and help you get unstuck, so to speak, when you're not sure which colors to use. This is why the concept of color temperature is such a key element of how we paint. It just might be more important than all the intricate brush strokes that I'm able to fit in right now. In fact, I ended up adding only a couple of petal veins, a lot less than I was naturally inclined to. I always tend to overdo it on the details, but it was quite enough to stop at this stage. And I hope you had fun going through the process with me. If you want to see more examples of using color temperature with different colors watercolor palettes, then you can check out the video above. Don't forget to subscribe and share the video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week with more watercolor adventures.